The tension in the air. Amara Taylor walked into the classroom, her head held high, her shoulders straight. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly in her ears, blending with the sound of her classmates' hushed whispers. The room smelled of chalk and freshly printed exam papers, a scent she had come to associate with her relentless pursuit of excellence. Amara scanned the room, her dark brown eyes observing the subtle cues of her classmates' nerves. Pens tapped against desks, hands fidgeted with papers, and a low murmur of last-minute reviews filled the air. This wasn't just another test. This was the Advanced Scholastic Achievement Examination, the final hurdle before the school's prestigious Star Scholar Award would be granted. Winning this award meant more than academic validation for Amara. It meant a scholarship to her dream university and a chance to rewrite her family's history. For years, she had sacrificed weekends, sleep, and any semblance of a social life to focus on her studies. This test represented everything she had worked for. Amara carefully placed her pencils, pens, and eraser in a neat line, her hands trembling slightly. She glanced at the clock. 5 minutes until the test began. The weight of expectation pressed down on her chest, but she took a deep breath, centering herself. As her focus sharpened, she couldn't ignore the subtle tension emanating from the front of the classroom. Mr. Franklin, her history teacher, stood rigidly behind his desk. His sharp, angular features looked even more severe under the harsh lighting. His eyes, dark and piercing, darted across the room, lingering on Amara longer than anyone else. The flicker of something, disapproval, annoyance, or perhaps something darker, crossed his face before he looked away. Amara had always been aware of Mr. Franklin's animosity, though she could never pinpoint its origin. He rarely praised her in class, and when he did, his compliments always carried a patronizing edge. She had overheard him once referring to her achievements as lucky breaks during a staff meeting. The memory of that sting resurfaced now, but Amara pushed it aside. "All right, settle down," Mr. Franklin barked, his voice cutting through the room like a whip. "You have 2 hours. No talking, no wandering eyes. If I catch anyone cheating, you'll fail the test immediately." "Understood." The room fell silent except for the shuffling of papers and chairs. Amara nodded along with the others, clutching her pen tightly. Mr. Franklin began distributing the exam papers, slamming each one down with unnecessary force. When he reached Amara, he paused, holding the sheet in his hand a moment longer than necessary. His eyes narrowed as if silently daring her to falter. Amara met his gaze evenly, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. Mr. Franklin dropped the paper on her desk with a muted thud before moving on. "You may begin," he announced. Amara flipped her paper over, her mind immediately slipping into gear. The questions were challenging, but nothing she hadn't prepared for. Her pen moved fluidly as she tackled one question after another. Time melted away as she worked, her confidence growing with every answer. But her concentration was interrupted by the sharp sound of footsteps. Mr. Franklin was pacing the aisles, his presence a constant shadow. Each time he passed Amara's desk, she felt his eyes on her, scrutinizing her every move. She refused to let it rattle her. She had worked too hard for this moment to let his hostility distract her. Just as Amara began the essay section, a part of the exam she had practiced for weeks, Mr. Franklin's voice boomed. "Amara Taylor, stand up." The pen froze in her hand. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Amara looked up, confused, her heart pounding. Mr. Franklin was glaring at her, his expression cold and accusatory. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You heard me. Stand up. Now." Amara slowly rose from her seat, her knees trembling. Whispers spread like wildfire across the classroom. "Mr. Franklin, what's going on?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "Cheating," he declared, holding up a folded scrap of paper. "This was found near your desk. Care to explain?" The room fell silent. Amara's stomach churned. "I didn't cheat," she said firmly. "That's not mine." Mr. Franklin's lip curled into a sneer. Convenient. But I don't believe in coincidences, Miss Taylor. Collect your things and leave. Now. Please, Amara pleaded, her voice cracking. I didn't do anything wrong. But Mr. Franklin was unmoved. Out. You can explain yourself to the principal. Amara glanced around the room, searching for a friendly face, but her classmates avoided her gaze. Her chest tightened as humiliation washed over her. Slowly, she gathered her belongings, her hands trembling. As she walked to the door, Mr. Franklin's voice followed her. Let this be a lesson to everyone here. No one cheats their way to success. Amara stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her. Her hands clutched her books tightly against her chest, and tears threatened to spill. She looked down the empty corridor, her heart heavy with despair. In that moment, Amara didn't just feel betrayed by Mr. Franklin. She felt betrayed by the very system she had worked so hard to succeed in. But deep down, something stirred. A quiet voice whispered in her mind, refusing to be silenced. This isn't over. The seed of injustice. Amara sat alone in the principal's office, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair as she stared at the clock ticking away on the wall. The soft hum of the air conditioning did little to mask the storm brewing in her mind. She replayed the moment over and over. Mr. Franklin's sneer, the accusing whispers of her classmates, and the shame of walking out of that classroom under the weight of his accusation. She was innocent, but the world didn't seem to care. The thought left a bitter taste in her mouth. Principal Carter entered the room, a man with a calm demeanor that did little to put Amara at ease. He sat down across from her, his graying eyebrows knitted together in a display of forced neutrality. On his desk sat the folded piece of paper Mr. Franklin had claimed as evidence. Amara, Principal Carter began, his voice measured. I want to give you a chance to explain your side of the story. Amara's heart raced. I didn't cheat, she said firmly, her voice quivering despite her effort to sound confident. That paper isn't mine. I don't even know where it came from. Principal Carter sighed, leaning back in his chair. Mr. Franklin says he saw you looking at another student's test. Combined with this note, he gestured to the incriminating paper. It raises serious concerns. Amara clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. That's not true. I worked hard for this exam. Why would I throw it all away by cheating? Principal Carter's expression softened slightly, but the rigidity of the situation remained. Amara, I've reviewed your record. You're a model student, which is why this accusation is so troubling. If you're telling the truth, we'll investigate, but I must warn you, false denials will only make things worse. Her chest tightened. The words felt like a trap. Amara stared at the principal, searching for any hint of fairness in his expression, but all she saw was the weary look of someone trying to avoid conflict. Why don't you believe me? She asked, her voice breaking. Isn't it innocent until proven guilty? Principal Carter hesitated. This is a serious accusation, Amara. We have to treat it as such. The door to the office opened abruptly, and Amara turned to see her mother, Lisa, stepping inside. Her presence was a force of nature, her eyes blazing with determination. Lisa had dropped everything to rush to the school as soon as Amara called, her fury barely contained. Principal Carter, Lisa said, her voice sharp as a blade. What is going on here? Principal Carter rose to his feet. Mrs. Taylor, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please have a seat. Lisa ignored the invitation, standing tall with her arms crossed. My daughter tells me she's been accused of cheating. That's a serious allegation, and I'd like to see the so-called evidence. Principal Carter cleared his throat, gesturing to the note. This was found near Amara's desk. It has answers that align with the test questions. Mr. Franklin claims to have seen her looking at another student's paper. Lisa picked up the note, her eyes narrowing as she examined it. This doesn't prove anything, she said firmly. Anyone could have written this and dropped it near her desk. And as for Mr. Franklin's claim, that's just his word against hers. Where's the actual proof? Principal Carter's calm facade cracked slightly under Lisa's intense gaze. "We are conducting an investigation, Mrs. Taylor, but we can't ignore the fact that a teacher witnessed something suspicious." Lisa's lips tightened into a thin line. "I've heard enough about Mr. Franklin's observations. My daughter is a top student who has earned everything she's achieved through hard work. I won't let her reputation be dragged through the mud without solid evidence." Amara sat quietly, watching her mother fight for her. A flicker of hope ignited within her, but the weight of the situation kept her grounded. This wasn't just about a test anymore. It was about proving her integrity in a system that seemed stacked against her. Principal Carter leaned forward, his hands folded on the desk. "Mrs. Taylor, I understand your frustration, but we have protocols to follow. Until we conclude our investigation, Amara's test will be invalidated." Lisa's voice rose, tinged with anger. "Invalidated? Based on what?" "Baseless accusations and a scrap of paper." "Please, Mrs. Taylor," Principal Carter began, but Lisa cut him off. "No, you're punishing her without proof. That's unacceptable. We demand a fair process, or we'll escalate this further." Principal Carter's jaw tightened. "We're doing our best to handle this matter fairly." Lisa scoffed. "If this is your version of fairness, I'd hate to see injustice." The tension in the room was palpable. Principal Carter eventually sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. "We'll expedite the investigation. That's the best I can offer." Lisa straightened, her fiery determination undimmed. "You'd better. And in the meantime, my daughter deserves the benefit of the doubt." As they left the office, Lisa placed a reassuring hand on Amara's shoulder. "We'll fight this," she said softly. "You don't have to face it alone." Amara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. Her mother's support was a lifeline in the sea of uncertainty. But as they walked down the hallway, Amara couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Franklin wasn't just mistaken, he was determined to see her fail. That evening, Amara sat at her desk, staring at the mountain of notes and textbooks that once filled her with pride. Now they felt like a cruel reminder of what she stood to lose. She thought of the countless nights she had spent studying, the sacrifices she had made to excel, and the dream of attending her dream university. All of it was slipping through her fingers because of one man's word. Her phone buzzed with a message from a classmate. "Sorry about what happened. I hope things get sorted out." Another one followed. "Heard about the cheating thing. Shocked too." Amara put her phone down, unable to read more. Each message felt like a dagger, reminding her of the humiliation she had endured. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She wanted to believe her mother's words, but a nagging doubt lingered. What if the truth wasn't enough? What if the system failed her? As she sat there, lost in thought, her mother walked in with a determined look on her face. "I've been doing some digging," Lisa said, placing a folder on Amara's desk. "And I think we might have a way to prove your innocence." Amara opened the folder, her eyes scanning the contents. It was filled with information about the school's policies, including a section about security cameras in the classrooms. Her heart skipped a beat. "Cameras?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa nodded. "If there's footage of the test, it could show what really happened. We'll demand access to it." Hope flickered in Amara's chest. For the first time since the accusation, she felt like there was a path forward. It wouldn't be easy, but with her mother by her side, she was ready to fight for the truth. The battle for justice had only just begun. Cracks in the facade. The next morning, Amara and her mother arrived at the school early, armed with resolve and the newfound hope of the security footage. The hallway was eerily quiet, the usual bustle of students absent at this hour. Amara clutched her backpack tightly, her palms slick with nervous sweat. She had barely slept the night before, her mind replaying the events of the previous day over and over. But today, she wasn't just walking into school as the accused. She was walking in ready to fight back. Principal Carter's office door loomed ahead, the brass plaque glinting ominously in the morning light. Lisa knocked sharply, her no-nonsense attitude cutting through Amara's nerves. The door opened, revealing Principal Carter sitting at his desk, already in the middle of his morning routine. His eyebrows lifted in mild surprise at their early arrival. "Mrs. Taylor, Amara," he greeted, his tone cautious. "I wasn't expecting you so soon." Lisa strode into the room, her presence commanding. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm but controlled. "Now." Principal Carter gestured to the chairs across from him. "Please, have a seat." Lisa remained standing, her posture unyielding. "I won't sit until you agree to something. Amara has been unfairly accused, and we demand access to the security footage from the classroom during the exam." Principal Carter blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Security footage?" Lisa nodded. "Yes. This school has cameras in most classrooms, doesn't it? Surely they were recording during the exam. That footage can prove whether Amara was cheating or not." Principal Carter hesitated, his hands fidgeting with the papers on his desk. "The cameras are primarily for safety and discipline purposes," he said slowly. "They're not typically reviewed unless there's a pressing need." Lisa leaned forward, her voice sharp. "This is a pressing need. A teacher has accused my daughter of cheating without solid evidence. You have a resource that could prove her innocence or confirm his claim. What reason could you possibly have not to review it?" Principal Carter sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I'll need to consult with the school's legal team about accessing the footage. It's not something we can do lightly." Lisa crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "How long will that take?" "A few days, at least," Carter admitted. Amara, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke up. "A few days. My test has already been invalidated. My name has been dragged through the mud. Every hour this drags on. The whispers and stares get worse. Please, Principal Carter, I just want the truth to come out." Principal Carter's face softened slightly, but the bureaucracy of his position kept him cautious. "I understand, Amara, but these things take time." Lisa stepped closer to his desk, her tone icy. "You have until tomorrow morning. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll take this to the school board and the local press, if necessary." Principal Carter flinched at the veiled threat. "That won't be necessary," he said quickly. "I'll expedite the process." Lisa finally sat down, her point made. Amara let out a quiet breath of relief, grateful for her mother's unrelenting support. But beneath her relief was a simmering anger. Why did it take such forceful measures just to get a fair chance? As they left the office, Amara couldn't help but notice the way students in the hallway glanced at her before quickly looking away. It was as if her mere presence was a spectacle. Whispers followed her every step, though no one dared speak loud enough for her to hear. She clenched her fists, determined not to let it break her. Her mother had told her that holding her head high was the best way to disarm those who doubted her, but it was easier said than done. The shame and humiliation still clung to her, and every sideways glance felt like a dagger to her confidence. In her first period class, Amara found herself sitting at the back of the room, far from the group of students she usually worked with. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. Even her closest friends seemed distant, their hesitant smiles failing to mask their unease. After class, she overheard two classmates whispering near the lockers. "I mean, she's always been a little too perfect," one said. "Maybe she did cheat." "Yeah," the other replied. "You'd think someone that's smart wouldn't need to, though." Amara bit her lip, her nails digging into the strap of her backpack. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but what good would it do? She needed proof, not just words. Meanwhile, in the faculty lounge, Mr. Franklin was feeling the pressure. He sat in the corner, pretending to grade papers, but his mind was elsewhere. The moment Lisa Taylor had stormed into Principal Carter's office, he knew he was in trouble. He hadn't anticipated the lengths Amara's mother would go to defend her daughter. He had expected Amara to shrink under the weight of the accusation, but instead, she was fighting back. Franklin's gaze darted around the room, paranoid that someone might sense his guilt. He had spent the night justifying his actions to himself. She needed to be taken down a notch, he thought. No one's that perfect. It's for her own good. But the more he tried to rationalize it, the more his nerves betrayed him. He had tampered with her exam answers and fabricated the note found near her desk, thinking it would be a clean break. But now, the possibility of security footage loomed over him like a guillotine. Franklin's hand shook as he sipped his coffee. If that footage showed him altering Amara's test or planting the note, his career, and possibly his freedom, would be over. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Later that day, as Amara sat in the library trying to focus on her work, her mother texted her, "Principal Carter just called. The legal team approved reviewing the footage. We'll meet tomorrow morning." Amara's heart skipped a beat. Tomorrow could change everything. For the first time in days, a sliver of hope broke through the heavy cloud of despair. As she closed her notebook and prepared to leave, a voice called her name. She turned to see Sarah, the classmate she had supposedly cheated off of, standing hesitantly near her table. "Hey, Amara," Sarah said quietly, her face filled with guilt. "Can I sit?" Amara nodded, wary of the sudden outreach. I'm so sorry about everything that's happened," Sarah began, twisting her hands in her lap. "I know you didn't cheat. I saw you during the exam. You were focused on your paper the whole time." Amara's breath caught. "Then why didn't you say anything?" she asked, her voice laced with hurt. Sarah looked down, ashamed. "I was scared. Mr. Franklin. He has this way of making you feel small, you know. I didn't want to get on his bad side. But now I realize how wrong that was. You don't deserve this." Amara's anger softened slightly. "Thank you," she said. "It means a lot that you came to me, even if it's late." Sarah nodded. "If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." As Sarah walked away, Amara felt a spark of courage reignite within her. She wasn't alone in this fight. Bit by bit, cracks were beginning to form in the walls of injustice surrounding her. Tomorrow, the truth would finally come to light. The battle for truth. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Amara's living room, casting long, golden streaks across the walls. Amara sat at the edge of the couch, her legs bouncing with nervous energy. Her mother, Lisa, stood by the door, checking her watch for the third time in as many minutes. "We'll be fine," Lisa said, her voice steady. "Remember, all we're asking for is the truth. No one can argue with that." Amara nodded, though her heart felt like it might leap out of her chest. The thought of returning to the school that had become a battleground for her integrity was daunting. But today was different. Today, there would be evidence, proof that could clear her name and expose Mr. Franklin for what he had done. Lisa's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. "Our meeting is confirmed. Let's go." The drive to school was silent, each moment charged with tension. When they arrived, the parking lot was already buzzing with students and teachers. Amara avoided making eye contact with anyone as they walked through the front doors. Her mother's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a silent reminder of the support she wasn't facing this alone. In the principal's office, the atmosphere was thick with unease. Principal Carter sat behind his desk, his fingers drumming against the wood. To his left was a man in a sharp suit, a lawyer for the school district, Amara guessed. To his right sat Mr. Franklin, his face pale, and his usually confident demeanor shaken. "Mrs. Taylor, Amara," Principal Carter greeted them as they entered. "Please, take a seat." Lisa ignored the invitation. "Let's get straight to it," she said, her voice firm. "You said the footage was approved for review. Have you seen it?" Principal Carter hesitated, glancing at the lawyer. "We've reviewed the footage," he said carefully, "and I think it's best if you watch it as well." Mr. Franklin shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Principal Carter." "Aye." Carter raised a hand, silencing him. "We're here to establish the facts, Mr. Franklin." The lawyer leaned forward, his voice calm but authoritative. "To ensure fairness, everyone in this room will have the opportunity to view the footage. The matter will be addressed based on what we see." Lisa crossed her arms, her eyes locked on Mr. Franklin. "Then let's not waste any more time." Principal Carter gestured to the technician at the back of the room. The lights dimmed, and a projector cast the black and white footage onto the wall. The timestamp in the corner indicated it was recorded during the exam. The room was silent as the video played. The camera, positioned at the back of the classroom, showed students bent over their papers, the tension of the exam palpable even in the grainy footage. Amara appeared in the middle row, her focus entirely on her work. Occasionally, she shifted in her seat or adjusted her pen, but her eyes never wavered from her test. Principal Carter glanced at Mr. Franklin. "This doesn't align with your claim that she was looking at another student's paper." Mr. Franklin opened his mouth to respond, but Lisa cut him off. "Keep watching," she said sharply. The footage continued. Students shifted uncomfortably, scratched their heads, and scribbled answers, but nothing suggested wrongdoing on Amara's part. Then, the screen flickered to a later timestamp. The classroom was empty now. The chairs neatly pushed under the desks. The door opened, and Mr. Franklin entered the room. Gasps filled the room as the teacher moved purposefully toward his desk. He flipped through the pile of exam papers, pulling out one with deliberate care. The camera zoomed out slightly, showing Mr. Franklin marking up the paper with red ink. His pen crossed out answers, added harsh comments, and scribbled corrections that weren't needed. Amara's stomach turned as she recognized her handwriting on the screen. Her perfect essay was being defaced in real time. The footage continued as Mr. Franklin walked to a corner of the room, retrieved a folded piece of paper from his pocket, and casually dropped it near Amara's desk. He glanced around nervously before leaving the room. The video ended, the screen going black. The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa was the first to speak, her voice cold with fury. "So this is your idea of professionalism, Mr. Franklin? Sabotaging the student's future to soothe your ego?" Mr. Franklin's face was ashen. He stammered, his words a tangled mess. I don't know what to say. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you deliberately framed my daughter," Lisa snapped. "And you've been caught red-handed." Principal Carter stood, his expression grim. "Mr. Franklin, this is an egregious violation of trust and ethics. Not only have you betrayed this school, but you've harmed an innocent student." The lawyer interjected, his tone icy. "Mr. Franklin, your actions may have legal consequences. Tampering with academic records and falsifying evidence are serious offenses." Amara sat frozen in her chair, her mind racing. She had dreamed of this moment. The truth revealed, her name cleared, but the reality was almost too overwhelming to process. She glanced at her mother, who squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I think we've seen enough," Lisa said. "I want a formal apology for my daughter, and I want this man out of the classroom." Principal Carter nodded. "Effective immediately, Mr. Franklin is suspended pending a full investigation. Amara's test score will be reinstated, and her record will reflect none of this ever happened." Lisa's eyes narrowed. Not enough. The damage to her reputation doesn't disappear with a reinstated test score. There needs to be accountability. Principal Carter hesitated, but nodded. "We'll ensure Mr. Franklin's actions are reported to the appropriate authorities." As they left the office, Amara felt a wave of emotions, relief, anger, and a lingering sadness for the trust that had been shattered. In the hallway, students whispered, their eyes wide with the news spreading like wildfire. "Did you hear? Franklin got caught." Amara didn't cheat. He set her up. For the first time in weeks, Amara didn't feel the weight of their gazes. Instead, she held her head high, her steps confident. Her mother smiled as they walked toward the car. "I told you, truth always wins in the end." Amara nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "And I'll never forget it." The battle was over, but the scars it left would remain. What mattered now was how she chose to move forward. And Amara was determined to rise stronger than ever. Rising from the ashes. Amara woke the next morning feeling like a weight had been lifted from her chest. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe freely. The truth was out, her innocence vindicated, and Mr. Franklin's malicious actions exposed. Yet as she stared at the ceiling, she couldn't shake the lingering ache in her heart. The events of the past few weeks had left their mark, and she knew she wasn't the same person she had been before. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, interrupting her thoughts. She reached for it, hesitating as she saw the flood of notifications. Her classmates, many of whom had remained silent or avoided her, were now filling her inbox with messages. "I'm so sorry for doubting you. I can't believe Mr. Franklin would do something like that. You're amazing for standing up for yourself, Amara." Amara read each message with a mix of relief and frustration. The apologies were welcome, but they didn't erase the isolation she had felt when everyone had turned their backs on her. She sighed and put the phone down, deciding that she would deal with those emotions later. Right now, she had a bigger task ahead, reclaiming her place at school and reminding herself, and everyone else, that she was stronger than the injustice she had endured. As Amara walked through the school's front doors that morning, she noticed a distinct shift in the atmosphere. The usual whispers and side glances were still there, but now they carried a different tone. Instead of suspicion, there was admiration and even shame in the way her classmates looked at her. The hallway seemed to part for her as she walked to her locker, students moving aside as if to make way for someone important. A few even approached her, their voices tentative. "Amara," Sarah said, stepping forward nervously. "Can we talk?" Amara stopped, closing her locker and turning to face her. "Sure," she said, her voice measured. She was grateful for Sarah's apology yesterday, but there were still unresolved feelings between them. Sarah hesitated, her hands twisting together. "I want to say again how sorry I am. I should have spoken up sooner. I saw you during the exam, and I knew you weren't cheating, but I was scared of what Mr. Franklin might do if I said anything." Amara studied Sarah for a moment. "I appreciate you telling me now," she said finally, "but you have to understand how lonely it felt, knowing people like you saw the truth but stayed quiet. I needed you then." Sarah nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. "I know, and I'll never make that mistake again. If you ever need anything at all, I'll be there." Amara offered a small smile. "Thank you. Just remember to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." As Sarah walked away, Amara felt a strange sense of closure. The wounds weren't entirely healed, but they were starting to mend. During her first class of the day, the principal made an announcement over the intercom. "Good morning, students and faculty. I'd like to address a recent matter that has affected our school community. An investigation has revealed that a member of our staff acted unethically in accusing the student of misconduct. We deeply regret the distress caused to Amara Taylor and her family. Moving forward, we will implement stricter oversight to ensure this never happens again. Amara, your strength and resilience are an inspiration to us all." The classroom erupted into applause, and Amara felt her cheeks flush. She glanced down at her desk, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. Her teacher, Mrs. Patel, smiled warmly at her. "You've shown remarkable courage, Amara," Mrs. Patel said. "We're all proud of you." For the first time in weeks, Amara felt a genuine smile spread across her face. At lunch, Amara was surprised to find a group of students waiting for her at her usual table. They greeted her with sheepish smiles and apologies, each trying to make amends in their own way. Among them was Malik, one of her closest friends who had distanced himself after the accusations surfaced. "Amara," Malik said, his voice filled with regret. "I let you down. I didn't believe you when I should have. I don't know how to make it up to you." Amara looked at him, her emotions conflicting. She wanted to be angry, to demand why he had doubted her. But she also saw the sincerity in his eyes and knew holding on to resentment wouldn't help her heal. "I won't lie," she said softly. "It hurt that you didn't stand by me. But I appreciate you saying this now. Just be better next time. For me, And for anyone else who needs you. Malik nodded earnestly. I will. I promise. The lunch period ended with laughter and shared stories, a stark contrast to the lonely meals Amara had endured over the past weeks. Slowly but surely, her world was starting to feel normal again. After school, Amara found herself called to the auditorium. The principal had requested her presence for a meeting with some faculty members. As she entered the large room, she was greeted with a standing ovation from the teachers and staff gathered there. At the front of the stage stood Mrs. Whittaker, the head of the academic committee, holding the Star Scholar Award trophy. Amara. Mrs. Whittaker began, her voice carrying across the room. We owe you an apology, not just for the events of the past few weeks, but for allowing such a grave injustice to happen under our watch. Your perseverance and grace in the face of adversity have reminded us all of the importance of integrity and fairness. She stepped forward, holding out the gleaming trophy. It is my great honor to officially present you with the Star Scholar Award. You've earned this in every possible way. Amara stepped onto the stage, her hands trembling as she accepted the trophy. The applause was deafening, and for a moment, she felt like the world had stopped spinning. As she looked out at the crowd, she saw her mother in the back, tears streaming down her face, her pride radiating like a beacon. Amara approached the microphone, her heart pounding. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind countless times, but now that it was here, she didn't know where to begin. I don't know what to say, she started, her voice trembling. This award means so much to me, not just because of what it represents, but because of the journey it took to get here. The past few weeks have been the hardest of my life. I've questioned myself, my worth, and even my place in this school. She paused, her eyes scanning the room. But through it all, I've learned that truth is worth fighting for. Integrity is worth fighting for. And even when it feels like the world is against you, there's strength in holding on to what you know is right. The crowd erupted in applause once more, and Amara stepped back, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, she knew that the pain and struggle had not been in vain. She had risen from the ashes of injustice, stronger than ever. And she was just getting started. The aftermath and new beginnings. Amara sat on the windowsill of her bedroom that night, the golden Star Scholar trophy glinting in the soft glow of her desk lamp. The events of the day replayed in her mind, a whirlwind of emotions that left her both exhausted and invigorated. She had fought for her truth and won, but the victory came at a cost she was still processing. For weeks, she had been crushed under the weight of doubt, humiliation, and betrayal. Now, as the applause and cheers faded into the quiet hum of the night, she found herself grappling with what came next. Winning back her dignity was one thing. Figuring out how to move forward was another. The next morning, Amara awoke to the sound of her mother's voice calling from the kitchen. She stretched, feeling a strange mix of relief and purpose. Today was a new day, one where she could finally focus on her future instead of defending her past. Amara, her mom said as she entered the kitchen, a newspaper in hand. You made the front page. Amara's eyes widened as she took the paper. There she was, smiling on the school stage, the trophy in her hands. The headline read, Star Scholar Stands Tall. How One Student Fought Injustice and Won. The article recounted the story of her accusation, the investigation, and the eventual vindication. It highlighted not just her academic achievements, but also her resilience and courage in the face of adversity. Amara felt a surge of pride, but it was tempered by the lingering bitterness of what she had endured. You're an inspiration now, her mother said, her voice filled with pride. People are talking about you for all the right reasons. Amara smiled softly. I'm glad the truth is out, but it still feels strange, like all of this attention. I didn't ask for it. Lisa placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. You didn't ask for it, but you earned it. And now you have a platform to show others how to stand up for themselves. That's a gift. Amara nodded, the weight of her mother's words sinking in. Maybe this wasn't just about her anymore. At school, the atmosphere had shifted completely. Instead of whispers and sidelong glances, Amara was greeted with smiles, nods, and even applause from her classmates. Teachers she barely knew stopped her in the hallway to congratulate her, their faces warm with admiration. "Amara," Malik called, jogging to catch up with her between classes. He carried a small envelope, which he handed to her with a sheepish grin. "I thought this might help." She opened it to find a handwritten note and a $50 gift card to her favorite bookstore. The note read, "Amara, I can't tell you how much I admire your strength. You've shown us all what it means to fight for what's right. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you when it mattered most, but I'll spend the rest of our time here making it up to you. You're amazing. Malik." Amara's heart swelled with emotion. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. "You didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," Malik replied. "You deserve it." The day continued in a blur of kind gestures and heartfelt apologies. Even Sarah gathered a small group of classmates who had doubted Amara to formally apologize in person. The gesture was awkward but genuine, and Amara found herself feeling lighter with every interaction. Later that week, Amara received an unexpected email from her dream university. The admissions office had seen the news coverage and wanted to speak with her about her application. Her hand shook as she read the words, her heart pounding with excitement. The video call was scheduled for the following afternoon. As she logged in, she was greeted by a kind-looking woman with glasses perched on the edge of her nose. "Amara," the woman said warmly, "thank you for taking the time to speak with us. Your story is nothing short of remarkable." "Thank you," Amara replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It's been a journey." The woman nodded. "We've reviewed your academic record and your application essay, and I must say, we're impressed. But what really stands out is your resilience. It's not often we meet someone who exemplifies both academic excellence and the kind of character you've demonstrated. We'd like to offer you early acceptance to our program, along with a full scholarship." Amara's breath hitched. "What? Are you serious?" "Absolutely," the woman said, smiling. "We believe you'll be a valuable addition to our university community. Congratulations, Amara." Tears streamed down Amara's face as she thanked the woman profusely. When the call ended, she sat in stunned silence, the magnitude of the moment washing over her, everything she had fought for. The late nights, the sacrifices, the pain had led to this. As the days turned into weeks, Amara embraced her new role as a voice for fairness and perseverance. She was invited to speak at local schools, sharing her story and encouraging other students to stand up for themselves. Her confidence grew with every speech, and she began to see the ripple effects of her actions. Students approached her with their own stories of overcoming adversity. Parents thanked her for inspiring their children. Teachers even used her story as an example of integrity in the classroom. One day, as Amara prepared for a speech at a neighboring school, her mother came into her room with a package. "This just arrived for you," Lisa said, handing it over with a smile. Amara opened it to find a leather-bound journal and a note. "Amara, keep writing your story. The world needs to hear it. Mrs. Whittaker." Amara smiled, running her fingers over the smooth cover of the journal. She knew she had more to say, more to do. This was just the beginning. Standing on the stage that evening, facing a crowd of eager young faces, Amara felt a sense of purpose like never before. She held the microphone tightly, her voice steady and clear. "Life isn't always fair," she began. "But when you hold on to your truth and fight for what's right, you find strength you didn't know you had. And that strength can change everything." The applause that followed wasn't just for her. It was for the power of resilience, the triumph of truth, and the belief that one person's courage could inspire countless others. Amara had risen from the ashes of injustice, not just to reclaim her own future, but to help others find the strength to reclaim theirs, and she was ready to keep fighting, one step at a time. Closing the chapter. The crowd's applause washed over Amara like a wave. filling her with a warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. As the students in the audience quieted, she took a moment to look at them. Really look. Their faces were eager, attentive, and full of possibility. In their eyes, she saw reflections of herself, hopeful, determined, and searching for validation in a world that often doubted them. My story isn't just about fighting injustice, she continued, her voice steady but infused with emotion. It's about believing in yourself when it feels like no one else does. It's about refusing to let anyone else define your worth. And it's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when you're scared. She paused, scanning the room. If you ever find yourself in a moment where you feel alone, like the odds are stacked against you, remember this. You are stronger than you think. And when you fight for the truth, you'll find allies in the most unexpected places. The auditorium erupted in applause again, and this time, Amara smiled fully, the weight of her journey finally lifting. She stepped back from the microphone, nodding to the school's principal, who mouthed, "Thank you." Amara returned to her seat, where Lisa was waiting, her eyes brimming with tears. "You were incredible," her mother whispered, pulling her into a tight embrace. The next morning, Amara woke to an email from her dream university, officially confirming her early acceptance and full scholarship. She stared at the screen for a long moment, letting the reality sink in. She had done it. Not just cleared her name, but secured her future, a future that was now brighter than ever. She turned to her mother, who was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "It's official," Amara said, holding up her phone. "I'm in." Lisa jumped up, wrapping her daughter in a hug. "I never doubted you for a second," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You earned every bit of this, Amara. Don't ever forget that." Amara nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. Her mother had been her rock through the darkest days, and she knew she wouldn't have made it this far without her. The next week, Amara returned to school with a renewed sense of purpose. The halls no longer felt oppressive, and the whispers had turned into words of support. Teachers treated her with a newfound respect, and even students who had doubted her seemed to go out of their way to show kindness. But Amara didn't let the admiration get to her head. She knew the most important lesson she had learned wasn't about winning a trophy or earning recognition. It was about staying true to herself and standing firm in the face of adversity. As she walked to her locker, she passed Sarah, who waved hesitantly. Amara waved back, offering a small smile. Forgiveness was a journey, but she was ready to start. At the end of the day, Amara stayed behind to meet with Mrs. Whittaker, who had requested to see her. The older woman greeted her with a warm smile and gestured for her to sit. "Amara," Mrs. Whittaker began, "I wanted to tell you how proud I am of you, not just for what you've achieved academically, but for the strength and grace you've shown throughout this ordeal. It's rare to see someone your age handle such challenges with such maturity." "Thank you," Amara said, her voice humble. "I couldn't have done it without my mom, or without people like you believing in me." Mrs. Whittaker nodded. "You've shown us all what integrity looks like, and I hope you'll carry that with you, wherever you go." Amara smiled. "I will." As she left the office, she felt a sense of closure. The chapter of injustice and pain was behind her, and the road ahead was filled with opportunities. For the first time in a long while, she felt ready to embrace them. That evening, Amara sat down at her desk, opening the leather-bound journal Mrs. Whittaker had given her. She flipped to the first blank page and picked up her pen. She thought about everything she had endured, everything she had learned, and everything she wanted to share with the world. And then she began to write. "This is the story of how I found my strength. It's not just my story. It's for anyone who has ever felt powerless, anyone who has ever faced injustice, and anyone who has ever doubted their ability to rise above it. This is for you." Amara's pen moved steadily across the page, her words flowing with purpose. She didn't know where her story would take her next, but she was ready. She was no longer just a victim of injustice. She was a force to be reckoned with, a voice of resilience, a champion of truth, and a symbol of hope for anyone who needed it. And her story was just beginning.